Okay, we are recording. Phil, how are you today?
I am over the moon. I've got a new album coming out tomorrow, and I couldn't be happier with it. My record company are happy with it. My family are happy. Everyone's overjoyed. We're just waiting for someone to buy it.
Excellent,
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah.
Um, before before we get into the track listing, tell me about how difficult you found it picking these songs,
Uh, a
if at
couple of
all.
a couple of the questions. It was a couple of the requests. I was like, especially the intro.
Hmm.
Intro, which was your introductory question, I was like this and I was like that, and I changed my mind, and then I thought about it, and then I thought, yeah, but and then you hear something else and you go, no, that's actually way cooler. So but some of them are like cast iron. They're just
Okay.
like I cannot move from. I won't give my choices away just yet, but there are a couple where you just go like, that was just like a deal breaker. You
Yeah,
know, it made my I heard it, my heart stopped, and my life went off in a different direction from the moment I heard that song.
wonderful.
That's the power of music, isn't it? That
Absolutely.
it can just elevate. It's it's a word I like to use because I like kind of my main decade was the 70s, and I always go like transcendental because you hear the music and it transports you to you're like 12 years old with a crappy Spanish guitar trying to learn how to play F, and then you hear Dark Side of the Moon and you go, wow, and and it takes you to another place and you go, I really want to learn how to get there. I
Yeah,
don't know if I can hang around when I get there, but I want to learn how these people manage to make this magic happen.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's talk intros, and you can talk me through some of the ones that almost made it, and as well if you'd like. I'll let you have some honourable mentions there.
Honorable
Um,
mentions. Yeah.
but yeah, go on. What is the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro for
The greatest ever intro this week is it's it's a
today?
it's a shame by the Spinners,
Oh,
which
tune.
which is kind of well, you obviously know it, like the mo I think it's the Funk Brothers, the Motown house
Yeah,
band. I don't know that for a fact,
I think you're right.
but I mean, regardless of the fact that the record, this guy, the singer, is just like amazing, and you hear the first minute, you go like, oh, he's okay, and then he just goes up the octave and it explodes into this other thing. But the on the intro, for anybody who hasn't heard it, there's like Motown tended to use three guitarists, and they'd all do different, have different tasks. And on this intro, it's just like two of the guitarists, and they're so accurate. It's like so deadly. It's melodic, it's groovy, it's exciting, and and also as a musician, it's like to play with that kind of groove and accuracy. You can imagine the red light goes on the studio, and those guys are just like put the fag down or whatever they might have been smoking, and just the arranger counts it off, and they start playing like these days. You'd kind of in modern recording with Pro Tools or whatnot, you'd have a guy looping that thing for 20 bars before they nailed it. And these guys probably just were just like, yep, I got this.
Yeah,
And it's on a different level to me. So for this week, it's a shame by the Spinners.
wonderful,
Mhm.
wonderful. Um, in regards to intros, like it always sort of fascinates me what guests come with because some people will go for something like Floyd, something that's literally a 10-minute intro, and then you'll get somebody that just go, oh, Beatles help, and which is
Yeah.
like bang straight in, and
Yeah.
so I'm always kind of curious as to what people are going to sort of bring to the table and what sort of angle they're going to go at, and I think to as I mentioned there, like help by the Beatles, these 2-minute perfect pop songs. Essentially, that was what what Berry Gordy and Motown was doing as well, wasn't it? Just
Yeah.
perfect pop records.
I had I was lucky enough when I was 18, I went to work for a record producer who's not known as well as Berry Gordy, but his name was Mickey Most. And in the 60s and the
He's a
70s,
legend.
he is he is a legend, but some people don't know his name anymore.
Mm.
And he would have that kind of, if he listened to a demo of an artist, he wouldn't wait for the chorus. He just like the first 20 seconds, flip it out, cassette or whatever. Like if you haven't got the vibe, is if you're not, we talk about Floyd, so they might have a 10-minute intro, but from the moment you put it on, you go, oh, hang on, what's going on here? Cool sounds, help, like bang, let's get on with it. There's so many, but it's a great opportunity in intro. So people can be so lazy, songwriters are just going like, oh, I'll just use the 4 bars from the start of the chorus instrumentally, and you don't it's like it's a fanfare, it's an opportunity to kind of get everyone, especially if you're at a party or a disco, you hear the first 3 bars of September by Earth, Wind and Fire, and they're like, come on.
Yeah.
It's the calling card. It's so important to me.
And then that's another interesting thing. You just instantly put that in a kind of in a club environment, and then the whole kind of, because again with intros and DJs, there's if you go to the, you look at things like the Wigan Casino where the DJs weren't mixing, they were telling you what they're about to play. Then they'd play these incredible soul records that in an instant you'd be dancing. And personally, like Michael Jackson's "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough," for me, that
Yeah.
intro, if I'm at and I'm at a party or something, if that comes on, I'm dancing with that. It's just so infectious. But then you look at sort of the way that dance music's moved now, that record companies are get artists to record specific remixes or extended versions where them intros are longer, so they're DJ friendly, so DJs can mix them as well. I think it's fascinating, like the ways that intros are used and can affect the art of writing. And with that in mind, Phil, I'm going to ask you, when you are writing, you touched on the 70s there, and as I was born in the 70s, but kind of I would say my music loving, and my formative years of music would have definitely been the early 80s and onwards. And like with the 70s, it was vinyl, and what you could afford, each week or every couple of weeks, if you could afford a single or whatever. And then obviously as times have changed, it was CDs, and then people be illegally downloading music from Napsters and LimeWires and such. And now we see a world where within a split second, whether it's on your phone, on your computer, or you've got the world's music there in an instant. Now there's a good and a bad side to that, and but with all of that in mind, I think it goes back to what you were saying about Mickey Mouse, where you've got 20 seconds to get that vibe, because now everybody's saturated in it.
Yeah.
And I wonder how that affects your creative process, if it does at all.
I would say that you're certainly being aware that I think there are something like 10,000 songs released every day now.
Is that what it is?
I don't. It's something like really distressingly, kind of not distressing, maybe overwhelming, because you go, I'm releasing my song, and there's 9,999 others competing for the first 10 seconds, 20 seconds of our customers, people out there listening, please like me, please like me. But with writing, I would say, I don't know what it is. You just kind of go, try to gravitate towards something that the only honest opinion you can have is your own. You can't second guess anybody else. You can't, you could listen to 10 records and go, we could do an intro like that or like that one, or we could do this, or we could do that. But it's ultimately when it, and this is the same for the rest of the song and the production, as the creator, if I'm the songwriter uh, or the producer, you got to love it. You really just got to go, oh, I love this, man. This is just rocking my world. Because if it doesn't rock your world, how can you expect it to get break through the other 10,000
Course.
songs
Yeah.
being released? That if you don't, and it probably won't anyway, but at least there's a good starting point to
Yeah.
go. I feel really good. I feel like this is funny. I feel like this is catchy. I feel like this is punchy. Could be any of those things that that make you go like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a cool way to start a record. And it could just be like a drum fill. But if it's like a cool drum fill, then I'm in. At least it turns your head. Yeah.
Um, Phil, tell me the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you.
Yeah. Emotional. I know the first record that I heard that I went that I had an aunt who, some people might have this phenomenon where they have an aunt who's only a bit like 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
old. So I had a young aunt, Aunt Judy, and this was in the 60s. So she was obviously crazy for the Beatles. And the Beatles had an EP. It was a Twist and Shout EP. Now, remember, they didn't put their singles on the albums. They were like extra, extra. How much talent did they have? But when I heard Twist and Shout at whatever age I was, 6 or 7, this might have been like a year or two after it came out, but she played it to me, and I was just like, I just, the sound. I realize now, you hear that was the end. They were recording the album. It was the last song of the day. Lennon's voice had gone. You hear all these details, but I know as a kid, I was just like, I guess that's when I thought that was maybe the first rock and roll record that I heard, where you go like, that attitude is a great tune, but the playing and the attitude to me is like, it's still absolutely golden. You just hear these guys going for it and they're loving it and they're giving everything, and Lennon's voice is going, and all those, the stacking of the harmonies where George and Paul are joining in, and it's just overwhelming, the excitement to me, beyond any Ed Sheeran record, any ABBA record, any classical record. To me, no one could touch the electricity of electricity. Is almost like, that's too dull a word. It's transcendental. It's like, fucking hell, God is in this, came into that studio. And now, I just, yeah. So every time I hear that, you go, and they're doing it in one take. They're
Yeah.
playing it off the floor, and George is doing his solo, and I mean, yeah. So that for me is that was the big punch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I reckon they're going to do all right, that band, the Beatles, mate.
Well, the jury's out. Yeah, give it another 57 years. Uh,
um,
uh,
Phil, pinpoint me the emotion. What was it?
I guess that would be excitement,
Yeah.
and not knowing I my parents didn't play music much in the house. There might be an odd Sinatra record, or about Bacharach, some nice records, but it wasn't, the radio wasn't on. So I guess when I heard it, it was sort of like, someone coming, a Martian arriving and hearing music for the first time, and like his body's moving, he's tapping his three-toed foot, and that's the effect it had on me.
Yeah.
In later years, and I think that's when I started um my love of music, but also my desire to learn it, to learn about it, you know.
Tell me about the song that reminds you of your time at school, please.
Okay, now I at school, so I was at school from the late 60s through the 70s. Now in the 70s, there was this band who not many people have heard of, again, like the Beatles, called Pink Floyd. And in our school band, I was the kind of guitarist and harmony singer and the kind of arranger, I would ask. But so Us and Them was the song Us and Them. Not only musically, it's so cool and the sounds are cool, but the lyric, Roger Waters' lyrics are, people would always poke fun at that and go like, oh, it's sixth form poetry because it's basically kind of people talking about people who have and people who have not in very broad strokes. But I think when you're like 14 or 15, it's if it had that kind of that whenever I think of Us and Them, I go back to the big canteen, the school canteen, where we actually did a concert. But most of the time, it was just the dinner canteen. That's
Yeah.
where you went. What used to be called dinner is now called lunch.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you went, and so yeah, Us and Them. I'm back in that canteen, and probably worrying about what the next chord change is in some small part. But Us and Them has got some like really beautiful chords.
Yeah.
The people often talk about Dave Gilmour and Roger Waters, but not so often about Rick Wright, who was the keyboard player, and who brought a jazzy kind of element, which you can hear on Us and Them, some pretty rich chords and some, I guess, what I might call some hip changes.
Yeah.
And again, it's that transcendental thing. You kind of go, I would still hear that and go like, cool. I would nod my head without any, alcohol or spliff or anything. And then I'm back. I'm 14 again.
When you was 14 and at school, where was that? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in West Suffolk, which is it's kind of like the Wild West. It's like dusty, flat. Nothing happens except for the occasional gunfight. No, it's a pretty sleepy part of town. Mainly sleepy part of the country, rural. My dad was a farmer, his dad was a farmer, my brother was a farmer, and so I came from a farming community, and which a lot of people did work on the land then. I know that sounds really kind of like you suddenly see in black and white photos and scratchy records, but it was like that's how it was. It wasn't that long ago when a small farm would employ 5 people. Now that's all gone.
Yeah.
It's all obviously like everything. It's done better by a machine, but that's just setting the scene. That's where I grew up. We were pretty. I guess some people call us hicks, or yeah. So pretty.
So how did that transition from hick to rock and roller kind of happen? Like you mentioned that you was in like a band at school, and
Yeah.
was that sort of thing with the arts and music, was that encouraged at your school?
No. I mean, I had a great art teacher who was, everybody talks about their favorite teacher, and he really encouraged me. I felt like I was rejected for the choir, rejected as a musician because I couldn't read, and I didn't have any of those. I guess I must have had this musical ability, but it wasn't until I was in the 6th form where somebody said, "Oh, you know that I guess that kid Phil, he's over," because I was making my own way, teaching myself guitar, piano, or whatnot. But no, I was lucky enough to live next to an Italian American family who were all musical. So that's where I kind of that's where I learned my music from. My art teacher encouraged me to be creative. So
Did
I
it
can't remember where we started out, but
did it seem possible, like, because one of the reasons I set this podcast up initially was to base it on certain areas, and that kind of what I think now is a myth that, if you wanted to make it in music or in TV, you have to go to London. You can't live in Essex and be successful. You can't live in Liverpool or Manchester and be successful. You got to move to London. Living in West Suffolk, like,
yeah.
did it seem like, well, if I want to succeed in music, I can do that here? Like, tell me about, like, where did it start to get momentum as being something where you thought, well, this could be a career, and tell me that kind of transition point from
Uh,
having that initial thoughts of like, well, can I do that living in Suffolk?
well, it was the dream, you know. I mean, in America, it's called the American dream. Where I was by the time I was 14, I had this one particular record, and it wasn't about making it in music then. It was just I loved it, and I taught myself with the help of my friends. I was really quite self-motivated. Like I would just disappear at school at break time to go and to try and learn how to play a piano. Um, and I think luckily my mum could see that I was just like obsessed with music, and and sadly, coming back to your question, she knew someone who worked at the BBC, who knew someone that managed a studio in Northwest London. So I finished school. I'd gone for an interview to be, a T-board. This position doesn't exist anymore, but you'd know it, like a tape op, an assistant engineer.
Yeah,
And I got a job. So I was one in 100 people who would have applied for that, and I went to London and lived in a bed-sitting Kentish town. So, and it was it was pretty lonely for a long while, but it was like being thrown at the deep end. I went from playing, with my mates in a punk band. I was also in a soul band, and picking up a little bit of cash here and there, to suddenly like working hours and hours with great producers like Mickey Most, seeing session players, being part of the process, recording pop records, orchestras and whatnot. So it was like being a cliche thrown in at the deep end.
yeah.
But yeah, so I guess there was, at that time, there was no way I could have made a career in music in West Suffolk. Now, it is completely different. For a start, there are very few of these big studios left. There used to be 100 in London. Now there's probably 5.
Yeah,
And the whole creation, making an album on your laptop. If you don't know how to do something, go onto YouTube. You can be sure somebody will be there to offer some advice on how to play a chord, how to record a vocal, how to do a mix. It's all there, isn't it? It's all there.
yeah.
So you can now do it from a bedroom in West Suffolk, but back in 1978, nah, no way.
I mean, what a good time to be in London. Tell me, and certainly sort of Kentish Town and stuff. Like, tell me a little bit about, maybe 78, 79. You touched on using a punk band. Like, I mean, was there anywhere more exciting to be involved with live music than in London in 1979? I mean, tell me about, as much as we've spoke about the beauty of the chords and such that Floyd were doing then. The complete anti-Floyd would have been what was happening in London then, like a few years after that, and tell me how that impacted on you.
Well, the sad truth is that I worked so many hours at the studio that the only exposure I had to modern music of the time the would be if the band making that music got signed and came in to make an album, Susie and the Banshees. So I was the tape up on their first album.
Wow,
Yeah, and the Jam. I was the tape up on All Mod Cons. That,
fucking hell, really?
yeah.
How
So
exciting!
yeah, and I have to say, so in I was living in Kentish Town, in northwest London, and but I wasn't going out because we'd come in at 10 o'clock in the morning, and you'd work to midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning, and which was a great way to learn because you're doing those 10,000 hours. You're just like you're recording pop, you're recording middle of the road, you're recording punk. You just go like, oh, I keep watching the producer, see what he's doing, what decisions he's making. So actually going to see a band was quite a rare occurrence because the social life was non-existent.
Sure.
And that but it didn't bother me. I realized later that it damaged me, but it's partly tongue in cheek. But I would go and see the Jam. They were just so thrilling as a live band,
Yeah.
and musically were right on it. I saw, I went to festivals like Rock Against Racism, and some of those bands you'd see, like I saw the Clash, and I didn't have that much nous about music, but I just thought, nah, these guys don't sound as good as the record.
Mm.
Or there seems to be an attitude, which is fine, but it's like so way off from the cool records that they made. Whereas the Jam, you went to see them live and you're like, wow, they could really play, they delivered, it was everything. And meanwhile, I would probably also be going to see what would be considered naff acts like Hall and Oates, and because I'm sort of like that's I'm lucky enough to have enjoyed lots of different types of music, but at heart, I do kind of gravitate to a bit of Blue Eyed Soul.
Oh, there is nothing uncool about Hall and Oates.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. What a band.
Uh,
Um, and they've been, I think they've been reissuing stuff recently, and it was I got close to having Daryl Hall on the podcast, and which would have been a dream come true. And I mean, for that Blue Eyed Soul scene as well. I mean, Hall and Oates. I mean, I'd love to know the amount of money they have made through people sampling their records, because some of the biggest hip hop records are
yeah,
absolutely flooded with.
I can't go
Uh,
for that.
oh my god!
Yeah,
Like,
what a groove.
oh,
And
unbelievable,
and that's
unbelievable.
all. I ended up playing with Mickey Curry, who was the drummer in Hall and Oates for 4 or 5 years, because he was in Brian Adams' band. Amazing drum. But I would go like, Mickey, tell me about, because you were on that album, and of course that's a drum machine. He's like, he was with the guy when he's programming it, but the bass line and everything, that's Daryl. It's
Yeah,
just what an amazing thing. His voice is still fantastic. I'm like you. I did meet him once about mixing an album, and said some very kind of said all the wrong things, so I never got that. But yeah, he's still got that voice and that attitude, and oh yeah, what an
I'd,
artist.
I'd recommend to any listeners that haven't checked out Hall and Oates already, then do so. But there's a wonderful series on YouTube. I think it's called Daryl's House, where he's got this
Yes.
beautiful barn, hasn't he?
Yeah.
And just some of an incredible bunch of musicians in there. And he has certain guests in, and there's one where he has the band Chromeo in, and they've got the vocoder, and they do. I can't go for that. But if you just put in Daryl's House, search that, and search Family Man, the
Uh,
version they do of Family Man is absolutely wonderful. That's my recommendation today, listeners. That
uh,
go get stuck into Hall and Oates. But what I want to ask you is, the first record you remember buying from a record store?
So this is, I think people will think I'm bullshitting because this is so cool.
You can't have a cool one. It's against the rules. You can't have a cool one for this one.
It's so cool, and it's so like a producer to buy Isaac Hayes' theme from Shaft.
Right,
No,
you've chose the coolest one that you could have. I've done 453 episodes of this podcast now. That's the coolest record for this. It really is. I think you've won.
thank you. You say that to all your guests. I know you. No, but yeah, anybody that I didn't know why I particularly obviously it's got like a wah wah and it's heavily arranged. People might think, oh, these guys are jamming in the studio, but they're not. Like Isaac Hayes would have written out all the parts, the drum, the bass part, the orchestra, you come in here, you come in there. It'd all be heavily scored. Because he probably had 3 hours to do it, I would imagine. And so people in those days tended to be but yeah, when I was like whatever, 11 or 12, might even have been before that.
Yeah.
Just hearing that the wah wah going.
Yeah.
And there's I never really paid any attention. There is some sort of refrain, Shaft, John Shaft, who's the biggest? There's all this going on. It sort of I didn't pay any attention to that. I was just listening to the tension in the music and
strings are amazing.
Yeah, those guys knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
A lot, and I guess where was he? Probably Stax Studios.
Yeah.
Those guys, you often get the sense that people go, oh, they just turned up, but they didn't just turn up. They're reading the dots. They're probably, reading the music. They're probably making suggestions, players to Isaac Hayes. Why don't I do this here? Tell me what you're going to do. Okay, that sounds cool. Go with that. Like real, maestros in their own field.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time. I just thought, wow, what's going on here? This is, yeah. So that was thank you very much. That was the first vinyl I ever. Vinyl 7-inch. I had bought an album, but that was classical music. It was the Planets.
Okay, nice.
Which is like if anybody hears that, you'll hear the whole history of Hollywood for the last 60 or 70 years have been pinched. You hear Hans Zimmer and you go like, wow, that's amazing. And then we check out the Planets and think it's quite it's for a lot of those film composers they use those style. Anyway,
I want to pick back up on your journey. So we've spoke about working with Mickey in the studio in the late 70s. Tell me about as we sort of move into the 80s, where your career then went.
Because I'd been Mickey's assistant on a lot of sessions, and one thing I learned from him, he was very sober, very focused. He was only interested in hits. So I guess through, you might say, by osmosis, I was like my art teacher. I was learning this is the way you make records. Like you, and he was always going on about the song. Meantime, I'm learning how to engineer, how to record drums, how to record a string section from other people and other producers. So because eventually, as you're the T-boy, then you're an assistant. I'm assisting Mickey. Then I got a shot because they had a publishing company at the studio. So they said, can you engineer the demos for these bands? And the bands would be like, might be Hot Chocolate, like not shitty, but some of them were shitty bands, but
yeah.
So you're learning how to deal with people. So then I'd become an engineer. And then I was often, I was actually quite insecure, but in the studio, I could seem quite arrogant. I often would be like, no, don't do it like that. Do it like this. But it wasn't coming from it wasn't coming from an arrogant place. It was like, I think this will be good. Just trust me. I'm a doctor. And so then I started getting gigs as a producer or as a co-producer with a band. You know, there's a kind of a hierarchy, and you move. So you go from assistant, you become an engineer. If you're any good, you get hired to co-produce an album. If that of course, the key thing is if something has success, then the record companies in those days would go, well, who's someone cheap and young, or who did that record, and it's that kid over at Rex Studios. Let's give him this new artist. And one thing, I guess, I used to, when drum machines came in, I was kind of given the drum machine, given the manual, and I'd sit there and figure out how to program it, which if now seems like nothing. But in those days, you were like a genius. The kid knows he knows how to program the drum machine. Get that kid. So I would get gigs because I could use program a Lindrum, a DMX, all the different sounds which are now, if you know Prince records or hip hop records, early ones, they would have been, might have been using those. So just because I read the first 10 pages of the manual, I started getting production gigs. I did, because they go like that. Yeah, he knows how to use drum machines. He's technology guy. Yeah. So, and then I gradually, the greasy pole, soon enough I came down.
Who was you working with like around about that time?
So then I was, so I co-produced The Cure. Around that time, that was a big moment for me.
What record was that?
So there was an album called Pornography, which is considered their darkest one.
Mm-hmm.
But I also did Love Cats, which is considered their lightest one. So I kind of did the whole, the thing about, I'm not taking the credit for that. They're great artists. Robert is an amazing musician, and more to the point, knows how to write a pop song. Production wise, I was also mixing things like Thompson Twins, Duran Duran. I was getting invited. I had another mentor, a producer called Alex Sadkin, who had been at Island Records. So I was gradually picking up these co-production gigs, just making my way. Prefab Sprout, XTC, just going back to the 80s. I was just working all the time. Graham Parker. I just go from one album to the next album. And
how was it? What was it like in the studio of XTC?
Well, there's the good and the bad. So for both times, I worked on 2 albums of theirs as the mixer. I never produced them. I was the mixer. They were signed to Virgin Records. I think Virgin liked what I did. But as is probably well known, the 2 principal songwriters in XTC were Andy Partridge, Colin Moulding. Colin Moulding, one of the funniest people I've ever met, barely ever said anything. And whenever he did say anything, it just cracked everyone up. Andy, very intense, non-stop talking. One of the rare cases where he was demanding, not in a bad way. That's fine. If I want to sound, I would try and acquiesce to his, whatever he requested. I try and get the drums to sound the way he wanted them. But unfortunately, he would always say, "Turn the vocal down, turn the vocal." Even though it was a great song, like turn the vocal down, cover it in like schmuzz. And my boss, Mickey Most, had been the opposite of that. He would sometimes like stick his head into the control room and go like, he'd point at his mouth and then point upwards, like turn the vocal up, communicate the that's basically like, people want to hear the lyrics. They want to hear the melody. They might like the snare drum, but they don't want it to be louder than the singer. So XTC, there were, and another member, Dave Gregory, who was the chief musician. That's who I'm still friends with Dave. I still catch up with him. So this interesting mix of a really funny person, a quite demanding person, and then Dave kind of quite chilled out in
Yeah.
Dave Gregory. Um, but all bands are like that. You
Yeah.
find every band I ever worked with, there's usually one member of the band that you kind of chime with, and you go like, you have the same sense of humor, or hopefully,
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell me about the song that soundtrack your year's clubbing.
Yes. Now this is a little bit of a confession that I really didn't have a clubbing phase in my life.
Yeah.
I I played with a soul band in clubs. We'd do covers of 70s soul tunes, and which was fantastic. But I wouldn't. By the time I was living in Northwest London, working at the studio, I must have gone to. I would go to a club maybe twice a year,
Yeah.
and I've come to dancing much later in life. I'm a very keen Friday night dancer in my own kitchen when the Sauvignon Blanc has been poured. I know I do love dancing, but back in those times, um, I went to some cool clubs as a guest in New York. People would go like, oh, the Paradise something, and I go, yeah, I went there. The River Club, these kind of what were they called, like seminal clubs.
Yeah.
But I would kind of visit with a friend, and I never embraced. I never embraced club culture.
But do you
So
think, things like Paradise Garage, wasn't it?
I
Paradise
don't. I can't remember. That's
the yeah, oh God, was it? And people talk about that and Mud Club and 54 and Hacienda and Wigan Casino and all of these like amazing venues. Do you think they felt amazing at the time, or do you think they've been made a lot more amazing post in with that sort of nostalgia when you look back?
I think probably the latter.
Yeah,
Because like I say, I didn't embrace club life, so I was never off my head in one of those clubs going
yeah,
like, this is the best night of my life, I'm dancing to this amazing music. um I mean, I saw Grandmaster, what was his name, Grandmaster Flash.
hmm,
Saw him in a club in New York, and you should be going like, wow, that's amazing, and I
yeah,
was just like, yeah, that's quite cool. I perhaps I was just too insecure, too insecure or too uptight to, because I would be going to a club knowing the next day at midday I had to start mixing something.
yeah,
So you can't go off on a trip or anything. And I don't know if I would have done anyway. I was always quite maybe yeah, I wasn't one for letting my hair down, and
yeah.
yeah, I felt, yeah. So as you pointed out, have these clubs take it. I went to the Hacienda and saw some bands, and it just seemed like another place.
Yeah.
I didn't, but it wasn't. That might be really offensive to people who loved, though, had fantastic nights, years in those places, but it wasn't part of my. It just wasn't part of me.
Sure.
That so I'm not the best person to ask, because I was touched by the sound of music, the records, and not by the experience of like clubbing.
Okay.
Yeah. How sad. Yeah. Yeah.
Um. Okay. Well, should we go home for track six? And shall we talk? Did we talk about your track? What track did you choose for clubbing?
Um I think for my idea of clubbing, like, I have playlists of dance tunes, but
Yeah.
Earth, Wind and Fire, September,
Perfect.
that's or Barry White, it's something that just makes me smile.
Yeah.
Whilst you're dancing. I've got some great moves, by the way. It's just,
Just throw that in there.
yeah, I swear I could have made it as a dancer, but no one will ever have seen me in my prime. But Barry White, oh man, I mean, to me, that's the sound of it. It's what a great sound.
Ridiculous.
Yeah,
Absolutely ridiculous.
yeah.
I'm going to take you home. Favorite song from an artist from your home county, please.
Well, we've mentioned West Suffolk, and the county of Suffolk in general is not renowned for its.
What you got?
We've got a Slim. We've got apparently Ed Sheeran went to school in Suffolk, so he's
Framlingham, wasn't it?
Framlingham, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and then Nick Kershaw from the 80s.
Yeah.
Lovely
He
guy.
wrote some
He
great songs.
wrote some
Wrote,
great songs.
wrote Chesney Hawkes' big hit, didn't he?
He had his yes, he did. But I also, when I was thinking about this question, I know Brian Eno is from Woodbridge in Suffolk.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, he's from which is East
Woodbridge
Suffolk.
is lovely.
Well, I can't remember going, but I know East Suffolk is pretty. When anybody says, "Are you from Suffolk?" They go, "Oh, it's so pretty," and I go, "No, no, 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 no. That's East Suffolk.
Yeah.
You've been to the nice part. When you get up to the west, it's just like flat and dusty." But so he collaborated, as many people know, with David Byrne from Talking Heads on many records, and the Once in a Lifetime, I think, is credited to David Byrne and Brian Eno, and Brian Eno would have produced it, and I think that's him singing on the choruses. That sort of, I think he has a real skill with harmony vocals.
Yeah.
So that's quite a that's the best that Suffolk has to offer.
I mean, you're welcome to that. I mean, that is amazing. And I mean, once in a lifetime. I mean, that's got to be in the running for one of the greatest intros ever. Just straight in and like that bass.
Yeah,
Like, Tina Weymouth. Oh,
yeah.
outrageous, outrageous! What a band!
What?
I mean, and the thing is as well with David Byrne is everybody. When you watch Stop Making Sense and you watch these performances, you watch the recent David Byrne film that he made. Like people just always sort of caught up on like his movement but and the songwriting within Talking Heads is ridiculous, but his voice is unreal.
It's,
Nobody sounds like David Byrne.
yeah, he made that space for himself, didn't he? That right from the moment I heard Psycho Killer for the first time at a gig at Cambridge Corn Exchange, which was my local kind of, if a middling kind of band was on tour, they'd come to the Cambridge Corn Exchange. So like the Ramones would play there, Rory Gallagher would play there, and before the bands came on, of course, there'd be a DJ. And I remember hearing that, and I mean, yeah, like that phrase "stop you in your tracks." It was like, what is this? You
Yeah,
just don't forget and in some respects, I don't know if he made lots and lots of great music, and probably still is, but Sucker Killer is just it just stands alone, doesn't it? Got that Talking Heads, that mean groove, the ridiculous lyrics, and hooks.
yeah.
Yeah,
But and we talk about a time when that come out, that would have been what 79,
I think maybe
maybe,
maybe a little bit early,
maybe
maybe
earlier.
yeah, 70. I'll go 1 year earlier. Yeah,
And you think like that's the time when people are trying to have pop hits. That intro, that they're not jumping straight in with that. That's a slow build, and it gets more and more sinister as
yeah,
as it starts to gather a bit of momentum.
yeah.
Wonderful record, absolutely wonderful record. Okay, last track, and this is when you get to be a tastemaker. Please
Cool.
tell me a song that you think many people may not know that you would like
Mm.
them to hear, please.
Now, I'm gonna take this question and point the spotlight straight at me
Do it.
and say, I one of the big influences of my life was an American artist called Todd Rundgren, who's a singer, songwriter, multi instrumentalist, and produced people like Patti Smith, Meatloaf, XTC. Um, And right from when I was like 14 or 15, I heard one of his records. And that was the moment that I thought, I have to know how to do this. I have to know how to do arrange the backgrounds, how to choose the right echo, how to write a song, how to kind of, try and make people feel the way I'm feeling. So his influence. About 5 years ago, I made an album under the moniker Astral Drive, which Todd fans go like, "Oh, they know what that means." But it was a sort of a love letter to those songs in my teenage years when I was just like in awe of every record he made. Um, and on this Astral Drive record, the lead single is called Summer of '76, which anybody who's in the UK in 1976, it was this amazing summer. It's been this summer, people have talked about it again, but I was 16. You're discovering music, you're discovering sex, you've got swimming pools if you're lucky. Every day was sunshine all day long. I was cycling around my hometown without any shoes on, just like a just wild and free. And so I wrote a song called Summer of '76 on this Astral Drive record, which is a sort of a mini autobiography. It's got where I grew up, what was happening. I went to London to try and make it, and my life sort of changed a bit. But then the melancholy of always looking back at this one time in my life where I didn't have a mortgage. I did have a job, but there were just no worries. It was just it came to the evening, you went to hang out with your friends and just having the time of your life. So Summer of '76 got this kind of Todd Rundgren-ish, slight Motown, and it's got some hooks. So hopefully I can turn on some of your podcast listeners to the joy of Astral Drive.
Wonderful. We'll make that really easy as well because we put together a Spotify playlist to accompany the podcast with all of the tracks on there, so people can go and listen to that. And people need to know more about what you're about to be releasing. What's happening?
What's happening with me is my album comes out September the 2nd, and it's a solo album. I've had this project called Astral Drive, which I mentioned, which was a Todd Rundgren homage. I know, very, very niche. With the solo album, the solo album is also a kind of homage to glam rock, to ELO, 70s influences, where when I would just want to make music that I want to make, that's sort of how it comes out. So the album is called, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, Now That I Have Your Attention, because as one of the 10,000 albums being released tomorrow, mine will be one of them. And I'm realizing I'm probably not going to get anyone's attention. I've had your attention today, Stu, and I really appreciate that. It's been a lot of fun.
And if people want to keep up to speed with you, Phil, where's the best place to do that?
I'm on what I like to call Instagramophone, and it's for the old people from the 70s.
I mean, that's something I would take to Dragons then. I'm loving that.
Yeah. Oh, nice. And I am, at Phil Thornally, no dots or anything. Good luck with spelling Thornally. Most people get it wrong.
Well, we'll make it easy as well. We'll tag you in all the posts when this podcast comes out. So if people haven't found you already, then they can do it by doing that. So
I appreciate that.
Phil, it's been a real joy talking records with you, mate. Thank you so much.
I could go on forever. They're great questions. And I love talking. I know you love talking about music. I love talking about music. We could do it all again and be completely different answers, but it's all good.
I'll tell you what, we'll run it back. What we do is every now and again we get guests back on, but we change these questions to gigs. and we base it all around gigs, first gigs, and
Excellent.
and
Yeah.
you know, like first, like emotionally, sort of seeing gigs that like change your emotion, it just absolutely just blow your mind. So let's get you back on and do one of them soon.
Emotion, my friend. That's what we're trying to do in music is whether you know it or not, you're trying to tap into someone's emotions.
100%,
Yeah.
100%.
Thanks,
Phil,
Stu.
mate, absolute pleasure. I'm going to press stop. Don't go anywhere.